to join me for a Journey of the Soul. Journey of the Soul is a project. You know what? I realized I need to spotlight myself. Okay, just for the sake of the recording, I'm going to back up. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Journey of the Soul. Journey of the Soul is a project of Last Kindness. Last Kindness is a project of a nonprofit called the National Association of Chevra Kadisha. Any Hebrew words I will be translating, but Chevra Kadisha means a burial society. And almost every Jewish community of any significant size likely has they're almost always all volunteer Jewish burial society. And later on in the hour, we'll explain really what they do. But the basic idea is that they prepare any Jew who passed away and prepare them for burial. Last Kindness is an effort to make education, information about the Jewish approach to death and burial and the afterlife accessible to Jews throughout. That being said, if you're not Jewish, I always assume that there are people who are joining who are not Jewish, and we think that there's still tremendous. We welcome you. We're happy to have you here, and we think there'll be a lot of value for you as well. Let's begin our journey. There are a lot of people in the world. Last time I checked, there's somewhere around 8 billion people. It's across several continents, hundreds of countries, and everybody on the planet has their own unique life experience. Even identical twins have their own life narrative. Some people live in third world countries. Some people live in first world countries. Some people become parents. Some people never do. Everybody has their own life experience. But there are two experiences, without exception, that every human being on the planet shares. The first is that if you are here today, and if you are a human being on planet Earth, then we have all gone through the birth process. Been there, done that. So we don't have to revisit it. And on the other end of the spectrum, without exception, every single human being will eventually face their own mortality, because it's part of what it means to be a human, is that we are born and we will die. And if you've lived into adulthood, which I think we're all here adults today, then we've already experienced the loss of someone, probably close to us. So anyone who's reached middle age probably does not have their grandparents, or certainly not all their grandparents, alive anymore. And so if death is just part of the human experience, like I said, that every single human being will have to confront, then we believe it behooves us to really think about this experience, to explore it, and see what implications we can derive and decisions around that decision of how we want to be treated potentially after we pass away should be, since eventually it will happen. I think one of the reasons that many people don't like to think about death is that the answers around death aren't as good as the questions. So even many young children will ask their parents, Mom, Dad, what happened when, Grandma Sue passed away? Or they might have a pet and their pet dies. And it's just a very logical question to wonder what happens to them. But the questions may be better than the answers. And so over time, the questions around death and what might come after sort of get pushed to the recesses of our minds. And we just get very busy with living day to day, getting through our to-do list. Judaism, however, actually has what I often call stunning clarity around death, about what comes after death. And with that clarity, it sheds extraordinary light on life itself and can have ramifications for how we can live the most meaningful life possible and also has ramifications for how we choose choose for our bodies to be cared for after death, and if we're decision makers for others, decide how our loved ones should be cared for. So, to begin our journey from the Jewish perspective, we're going to begin with what seems like a really simple question. 3 words. Who are you? And I'm going to encourage each of you, I'm actually going to be quiet for about the next 30 seconds, to just compose. You don't have to share this. Just compose, meaning if you have a piece of paper, write it down or type it in your phone, message yourself, or just, think out loud. You're on mute anyway. You can say it out loud if you'd like. Who are you? You don't have to share, but if you composed a response or thought of a response, just give me a thumbs up. If you're on camera, just put your thumb up. Great. Okay, thank you. The more you do the exercise, I think the more you'll get out of it. So I've asked this question to hundreds of people, and I have found that there are 3 variables that tend to make it into most people's answer. Variable number 1, and again, sometimes this depends on the age and stage of the audience that I'm speaking to, but very often when people think about who they are, they think about their occupation. How do they spend most of the hours of their waking day? Where do they devote their energy? So people will think about, I'm a doctor or an accountant or a retired accountant. I'm a school teacher. If someone's retired but they do a lot of volunteer work, they may think about what they do during the day, what fills their day, their activities, where their headspace is. So that is very, very common as people think about who they are. I'm a writer, I'm an actor, I'm a soccer coach. Okay. This next variable is by far the most common that I hear when I'm in sort of more of a live audience, not on Zoom, and people are sharing and talking, is that people very, very often, I'd say 75% of the people who I ask this question to make some reference to who they are vis-a-vis their relationship with other people. So people will think of themselves as a spouse, as a parent, as a child, as a sibling, as a friend, as a part of a particular community. They're part of the Mahjong club, the investment club. Maybe they're part of a synagogue. That's all who you are vis-a-vis another person. And the third variable that doesn't always come into someone's written response, but when people spend a little bit more time thinking about it, is who we are just in terms of our physical makeup. So for instance, I think of myself very much as a female. I'm a woman. I'm Caucasian. I have a certain build and certain coloring. So if any of these features, if any of these variables came into your response, just give me a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing. I can't see everyone. I'm going to challenge this. Occupation. So over the course of a lifetime, many people change occupations, or a lot of us have a goal of ultimately retiring one day. So I'll tell you, my personal background is I worked in the field of medicine for 20 years. My background is I'm an adult geriatric nurse practitioner. I left the field of medicine in about 2020 in order to work on this project, Last Kindness. So I no longer have patients on my schedule. I'm no longer going into a medical practice, but am I still me, even though I don't work as a nurse practitioner? Yeah, I still feel like I'm me. COVID, technology are both phenomena that have completely disrupted many industries. It's not uncommon today, certainly in the younger generation, for people to shift careers and jobs. And most people would say, even though what I'm doing during the day has shifted, me, who I am at my core, I'm still me, even if my schedule looks different, I'm doing different things. Relationships. Relationships shift over the course of a lifetime. So let's start with a married couple. And someone thinks of themselves very much as a spouse, and then their spouse passes away. So they're no longer a spouse. It obviously has a lot of implications and ramifications on a person, but we would say, are you still you? even though you no longer are a spouse, you don't have that role, either because of a death, maybe there was a divorce. Most people would say, yeah, I'm still me, even though I'm no longer a spouse. If someone thinks of themselves as part of a particular community, and then they move across the country, and they're no longer part of that synagogue or part of that club or whatever the community of people they were, are you still you? Most people would say, yeah. Even though relationships are probably the most significant part of most people's lives, even more than their occupation, most people would say, even as relationships shift over the course of a lifetime, at my core, I am still me, even if my relationships change. And our very physical makeup. So as people age, the body changes. For example, let's say somebody very much identified as a runner. They were a jogger, they ran every day, they did half marathons, and as they age, maybe their knees are no longer cooperating quite like they used to. Maybe they get to the point where they need to even use an assistive device, like a walker, or perhaps at some point becomes wheelchair bound. Let's say someone has to undergo an amputation. And we ask them, are you still you, even though your knees, your legs have changed? I say, at my core, at my essence, yeah, I'm still me. Just to bring out this point, because this point is really important, that we are not our bodies, even though our bodies are very important, I want to share with you a magical, theoretical example. Imagine you woke up in the morning and you go to the restroom to wash your hands, brush your teeth, wash your face, you're washing your face. You look up in the mirror, and instead of you seeing your reflection, reflecting back, you see the reflection of your neighbor. Now, depending on how you feel about your face and depending on how you feel about your neighbor's face, you may be pleased or unpleased. But until you looked into the mirror, nothing else internally felt different. Your thinking was the same. What's on your to-do list is the same. The song you were humming in your mind was the same. Everything internally was the same. It was only when you looked into the mirror that you saw a different reflection that you noticed something had changed. You got a face transplant overnight. Now, obviously, it's a very silly, magical example, but I'm using it to bring out the point that our physical bodies, even though they are incredibly important, they don't really define us at our core. Most people would say, even if my occupation changed, even if my relationships changed, and even if my body changed and changed significantly, I would still be me. And so then I come back to that original question. Who are you? From the Jewish perspective, you are not your job. You are not at the most essential, deepest level, your relationships. And you at your central, deepest level are not even your physical makeup. From the Jewish perspective, who you are is something that we call in Hebrew a neshama. Whenever we translate, something always gets a little lost in translation, but we'll call it a soul. From the Jewish perspective, every human being has a soul. The soul is a spiritual entity. It's a piece of the divine. It means it's not bound by the physical world or the constraints of the physical world. It has enormous capacity and potential. It's the piece of you that decides to be selfish or selfless, to give or to withhold. It's the part of you that makes choice, that experiences emotion. But if the essence of every human being is a spiritual entity, we run into a challenge because we live and operate and function in a very physical world. So if you hear that, I am banging on a physical desk. If I'm chopping vegetables and the knife slips and I accidentally cut my finger My skin will bleed. We live in a physical world. When I talk about conceptual concepts, I like to use analogies to help us relate. So I'm going to share with you the first analogy. I want you to imagine a very powerful car motor, a V8 twin turbo engine, pristine, right out of the factory. This motor has tremendous potential for power, for speed. But if I take that motor and I put it on the interstate, just by itself, it's not going anywhere. I could pass it on my rollerblades. But if I take the motor and I give it rubber tires, a metal frame, electrical and plastic components, a body, I give it the body of a car. Now the body of the car with the motor in it, now the motor can manifest itself. Combined, that motor can manifest its speed and power. We need a body. In order for me to connect with you right now, in order for someone to make a blessing or to say a curse, they need a working larynx, pharynx, vocal cords, tongue, teeth, lips. Those are all physical entities. If I want to hug someone or I want to punch someone, depending on the choice that I make, I need a working nervous system. I need my muscular system to work. I need my hands and bones and joints and muscles to all work in coordination. I'm not going to read it, but this is the original Hebrew from the Bible, from Genesis. And this is the description of the creation of the first human being. It was a two-step process. Step number one, I'm just going to read it in English, but for those of you who can read Hebrew, there it is. And if you want to look it up, it's Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. God formed man out of soil from the earth. The body of the human being is from the earth. Its source is the ground, the earth. Step 2, he, referring to God, blew into his nostrils a living soul. Step 2 is that God, whatever this means, blew from his nostrils, blew from with him into the nostrils of the first human being. By the way, we call him Adam. People call him Adam. If you're familiar with Hebrew, the word for earth is Adamah. Adam comes from the Adamah, it's the same word. And then man becomes a living soul. So here's my second analogy. I have this balloon. It's very limp. It has the body of a balloon, but it doesn't really have any life to it. Watch what happens. I'm going to blow from within me into this balloon. I'm going to knot it. And now this balloon has, in front of the camera, a piece of me. It has breath from within me in this balloon. And now the balloon has some body to it, right? Has some life to it. Had a body before, now it has some life. That is an analogy for the formation of the human being from the Jewish perspective. Two parts. Body comes from the earth. The essence of the person comes from the divine, and then they become a living soul. So to go back to our question, who are you? I want to share with you a little story. There was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Noach Weinberg. He passed away about 10 years ago. He was American born, but he ended up in Israel, and he opened a Jewish outreach center in the old city of Jerusalem. There was a young man, we'll call him Steve, in his mid-20s, who had kind of been backpacking through Europe, asking, looking for himself, asking big existential questions in life, ended up in Israel, ended up in Jerusalem, ended up at the wall, and from there ended up in Rabbi Weinberg's office. And they're talking, and Rabbi Weinberg asks him, Steve, do you believe that you have a soul? Steve is a thoughtful young person, and he doesn't answer right away. And after a few minutes, he says, you know what, Rabbi? I do believe that I have a soul. And Rabbi Weinberg leans in and he says, you're wrong. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. Who are you from the classical Jewish perspective, and who every human being on the planet is you are a soul and you have a body. When we understand what a person is in life, then we can understand very simply death. If in life, body and soul come together, then death is simply the separation of body and soul. This is us in life. Body and soul, two separate entities. One is spiritual, one is physical, but they are completely intertwined. I call them the most intimate of life partners, closer than a husband and wife, closer than a mother and child. The body allows the soul to manifest itself, but the body isn't the person at the core. Upon death, the two entities separate. And here's the original source, the original biblical source that describes death. This is from the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm just going to read it in English. The Hebrew is there for those who are familiar. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. The construction of the human being is a two-step process. The source of the body is the earth. The source of the soul is the divine. They are together in life. That's the journey in the beginning. The next step of the journey, death, is simply the separation of the two entities, and they each return to their source. The body is to be returned to the earth through burial to its source, and then the spirit, the soul, returns. It continues its journey. From the Jewish perspective, since every human being has a soul, the essence of a person never dies. It's only physical things that have expirations that die. And now the soul moves on. So the soul of anyone you loved who passed away, their soul persists. It's their body that's no longer here. From the classical Jewish perspective, and when I say Jewish, there's like this old joke, 3 Jews, 5 opinions. But what I'm sharing with you is traditional classic Judaism, rooted in sources that are not just hundreds, but thousands of years old. So when I say Jewish, you will definitely find streams of Judaism that don't align with what I'm saying. I'm talking about traditional classic Judaism with the sources rooted in the Bible and in the Talmud. From traditional Judaism, a belief in an afterlife is just a primary belief. Actually, many parts of Judaism actually don't make any sense at all in the absence that there's a belief that something comes after. What is the Jewish perspective on the afterlife? What happens to that soul after clinical death? What is the experience of the soul? This is obviously an icon that's a spoof on YouTube. The Jewish perspective on the afterlife, first I'm going to tell you what it's not. It is not anything that Hollywood has produced. Heaven, which we believe in, is not angels with wings and a big feast of food and pearly gates. Hell, which traditional Judaism believes in, is not pitchforks and devils and fire. That probably comes from Dante's Inferno. Those are all physical depictions, and the afterlife is not a physical place. Unreleased from the constraints of the body, the soul has perspective on truths of the world, but it has perspectives on the life that we lived, the choices that we made in life, and listen close, my friends, probably the most important, the implication of the choices that we made. So let me start with hell. 2 of the most painful emotions that a person can experience are probably shame and regret. Now, because everybody, myself very much included, on the Zoom today is a human being, I'm going to make the presumption that none of us have lived perfect lives, which means to some extent or the other, we've probably all experienced shame or regret to some degree. The Jewish understanding of what hell is seeing our life and the poor choices that we made, the mistakes, the missed opportunities. That is the Jewish experience of hell. However, that being said, as long as we were alive, everybody here today, you're here today, it means that you woke up this morning. Your heart is still beating. It means that as long as we're alive, we have the opportunity to make better choices, to right any of the wrongs that we've done. Let me give you an example to demonstrate the Jewish perspective of heaven, and I am purposely using a very mundane example. I grew up in a town called Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's New Jersey, but it's about 9 miles from downtown Philadelphia, where Pennsylvania and New Jersey border up to each other. Growing up, my mother worked in downtown Philly. She worked in corporate America. She led a big team. And in order to get from New Jersey to Philadelphia, you have to go over the Ben Franklin Bridge. She went over that bridge every workday morning. And I remember her telling me once that even though she had Easy Pass, she would spend a few extra minutes in the morning going into the cash lane. Why? Why would she do that? Isn't everyone in a rush to get to work in the morning? She said because at 8:15, when she crossed the bridge, there was one particular lane where the toll taker, as he took her, whatever it was, $3, would give her this big, heartfelt, good morning. And it was just so sincere and so pleasant that she'd rather spend a few extra minutes to get that heartfelt greeting. And she said when she got to work, she was in a better mood because of that greeting. And she was probably a little bit kinder, a little bit more positive with the team that she oversaw. And, when your boss is happy with you, how do you think all the people on her team were interacting with each other? A little bit nicer, a little bit more patient, a little bit more forgiving, a little bit happier. And if they had a good day at work, when they went home to whoever they spent their evenings with, they were probably in a better mood, a little more patient, maybe cracked a joke that they otherwise wouldn't have. Now, my mother never found out this toll taker's name, and he never asked her name. But for the sake of this true story, I'm just going to call him Tom. Now, if I had to create a list of the 10 most inconsequential jobs, I might put toll taker on there because most toll takers today have been replaced by barcodes. Easy Pass, right? You just shoot through. From the Jewish perspective, not only did Tom live an incredible life, because he, I don't know if he's alive anymore, but once he passes away, he is going to have access to seeing the implication of his choices. My mother is one person. There are thousands of people who cross over the Ben Franklin Bridge every day. Tom impacted really an incalculable, standing here in life, number of people in a positive way because of the implication of simply saying that heartfelt, pleasant good morning. And from the Jewish perspective, he experiences that with full knowledge now in the afterlife of the implication of his choices forever, because the afterlife is an eternal soul experience. From the Jewish perspective, every moment of life is so precious because every moment of life, depending on the choices that you make, you are scripting your eternity experience. How you choose to act, how you choose to interact, You are going to live with that forever. This story demonstrates you don't need to be rich. You don't need to be powerful. You don't need to be gifted or particularly smart or talented to live not just a meaningful life in this world here, but to live meaningfully forever. If you take nothing else away from today, if you log off now, know that every moment of your life matters. The choices that you make have implications for you forever. The very last thing, and this may sound very shocking, even to Jewish participants here today, is that in traditional Judaism, there is an absolute belief in resurrection of the dead, which at first sounds like very sci-fi, right? Science fiction. First, again, I'm going to tell you what it's not. It is nothing Hollywood has produced. It is not zombies coming out of graves. We actually see the phenomena of resurrection of the dead taking place every day in nature. We just don't call it resurrection of the dead. We call it planting and sprouting. Here's what happens. Imagine you're munching on an apple. Munch, munch, munch. It's done. You're left with some seeds. You take a single seed. You bury it, otherwise known as plant it, into the ground. Mm-hmm. Now, if you had a little GoPro camera and can follow what happens to that seed underground, what you would see is the seed decomposing. And then if the right elements are in place, like enough water, oxygen, sunshine, come back maybe a few weeks or a few months later, and you will see a sprout. Come back some years later, and you will see a tree. I want you to picture this apple seed. I want you to picture the apple tree. Picture them next to each other. Do they look like identical twins? They don't even look like fifth cousins once removed. But that tree grew from the seed that had decomposed in the earth. From the Jewish perspective, this is something that will happen in the future. This is what the sources talk about. The Talmud says, no eye has seen it yet, so it's hard to reference something. It does reference the seed in the ground, so we do have actually a paradigm, a model for this. There is some kind of reunification in the future of body and soul. It's not just coming together like we are now. It's a little bit of a flip. So let me just explain to you what that means. So when I meet someone for the first time, the first thing that I usually notice about them is just their physical makeup. So when I notice someone for the first time, I just make a note like, it's a male, it's a female of a certain age. And then as I start interacting with them, having a conversation, talking, then I start to get a sense of more of like their soul, right? Their personality, their character, their values. And then I see them more as a complete person, body and soul. We may not call it soul, but it's beyond their body, right? A body could just be like a mannequin. So that coming together in the future of body and soul is almost like the flip, where it's actually the soul that is the primary, almost like the primary identifier, and not the body, which is actually how it was back in the Garden of Eden. We're already getting into a little bit more Jewish mysticism here. But if you're interested in this, go read the Bible. At first, Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, were not dressed. What is it, a nudist colony? They're walking around. And it was only after there was some sort of, sin that then they felt embarrassed. Why weren't they embarrassed before? Again, we're getting into Jewish mysticism here, but there was a switch. At first, the body was really secondary. And then it flipped. So from the Jewish perspective, the takeaway really is, for this point, is that burial in the earth is really seen as a planting for the future. We know when we put something in the ground, like the seed, it's preparing it for some other stage. So after clinical death, body and soul separate. This all creates now a foundation, a context for us to understand And I see there are a lot of things in the chat. If you weren't here in the beginning, I'm going to stay on to address any of the questions. So by all means, if you have questions, just plug them into the chat so you don't forget. We now have a foundation to understand all the Jewish burial laws and traditions. Not just that, I don't know, they're traditions, like that's what my great-great-grandmother did, so that's why I'll do it. Which I always say, like, my great-great-grandmother probably washed her dirty laundry in the river. I'm not going to do that. I'm very happy in 2025 with my automatic washer and dryer. So that doesn't make sense for me anymore. But we've now created a context to understand, and we'll go through them, but why all the Jewish burial laws and traditions still have relevance today. Let's just maybe get a little interactive here. So by all means, you can take yourself off mute or put it, and I'll open up the chat so I can see it. When you think of Jewish burial laws and traditions or afterlife care, how we care for someone after they passed away, what comes to mind? You can put it in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute.
Traditional burial.
Traditional burial. Staying with the body until burial, someone put in, Edie. Okay, very often people will say, okay, a Kaddish, washing the body. Thank you, Marilyn. Wearing a kittel. Wow, okay. Yep. We'll try to explain what that is. Okay. Let's go through these three buckets. The first one is that all the traditions, whether they're customs or law, all need to be focused on A, respect for the body. Now, the body, as we went through, is not who the person was, but it was a very important component of the person. It housed the soul of a human being. It allowed that soul to manifest its choices. And therefore, from the Jewish perspective, even once the body is no longer in service, once the soul is separated from it, the person has died, the EKG is flat, the body is considered sacred and needs to be treated as such, which means that we treat the body respectfully, even though it's no longer useful. Bucket number 2, value number 2. Everything we do is with sensitivity. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. It's in sensitivity to the experience of the deceased. The person died. The person died. Their body died. But we have the perspective that souls don't die, that they have a soul, and the soul persists because the soul is not physical. And the soul separated from the body is aware and concerned with how its body is being treated. Earlier I said, body and soul are the most intimate of life partners, closer than a mother and a child. You can imagine that when a mother sends her small child off to kindergarten for the first time or off to sleepaway camp for the first time, she is very concerned with how her child will be treated. The soul is concerned with how its body, who it lived with for however many decades it was, is treated. Everything we do is in sensitivity that this deceased is still having an experience. The more careful and gentle and respectful we are to its body, it is considered a kindness, actually the last kindness that we can do for the deceased. When we treat the body disrespectfully, it brings pain to the deceased. It is only after the body has been returned to the earth that the lens shifts. And then we focus on the mourners. But stage 1, when a person dies, from clinical death through the burial, all the laws and traditions are completely focused on caring for the deceased. Once he or she has been buried, then we focus on caring for the remaining loved ones. And the third variable is that we do everything we can naturally to hasten the body's return to the earth. So very often when I ask this question, what do you think of when you think of Jewish burial laws and traditions, people will say quick burial or bury within 24 hours. And I see some people nodding. So it's not actually a Jewish law, like 24 hours. The goal is bury as quickly as possible. So it's possible for somebody to pass away at 8 a.m. in the morning and be buried by 12 p.m. That's not always possible. Maybe someone passed away in New York and their daughter needs to fly in from Hong Kong. And so they will wait for the burial. The concept here is that the quicker the body can be returned to its source, to the earth, it is a comfort to the soul and allows the soul to proceed on its journey because it's on its journey. The first part of the journey was combining with the body. The second part of the journey is a separation from the body. The next part of the journey is once the body has been buried in the earth, the soul can move on. So let's go through some of them. This happens to be the logo for just my local Chevra Kadisha Jewish Burial Society, where I'm a volunteer. And a lot of the services that are provided, that I'm going to go through, can be provided by a Chevra Kadisha anywhere in the country and the world. So we're not here to promote anyone in particular, but you should just know that those societies exist. I'll get a little bit more into them soon. So we're just going to go in chronological order from when a person passes away. So this is a custom. It's not a law, but it's a very traditional custom to never leave the body alone from clinical death until burial. During the day, there's usually people around. Someone passed away in a hospice or a nursing home, there are people who work there. In a funeral home, there are people who work there. But assuming that the person's not being buried on the same day that they died, what happens at night? And so it is a very, when I say custom, I don't mean like in the last 100 years. I mean rooted in hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, that there's always somebody with the body. The Hebrew word is shmira. It means that somebody stays there. It means that there's somebody in the same building under the same roof. They don't have to be in the same room. It could be a family member, but it does not have to be. And if you don't have anyone to stay there, then you can contact your local Jewish burial society, or sometimes a funeral home will be the ones to arrange it, and ask that you want to arrange for this. The person will often say psalms which bring comfort to the deceased. Yes, when I say bring comfort to the deceased, again, we believe the deceased is having an experience. So we want to do everything that we can to be as sensitive to their experience as possible. Next, Tahara. This is one of those words that really doesn't translate well. But this is the core service of any Chevra Kadisha, of any Jewish burial society. Jewish burial societies, 97% of the time, are made up all of volunteers. Nobody's making money off of this. This is an act of kindness that they want to do as service to their community. There's a men's team and a women's team. So when a man passes away, it's a team of men, usually about 4 volunteers who come. If it's a woman who passes away, it's a team of women who come to prepare the body for burial. This is as opposed to, let's just say, any employees of the funeral home who will take care of, grandma or grandpa, doesn't matter. Their job is to prepare the body for burial, and that takes 4 steps. Step number 1 is literally washing the person. They'll remove anything external. We wanted to try to return the body to the earth in the most natural way, similar to how it came into the world. So if there's bandages, tubes, makeup, nail polish, all of that gets taken off, and then the body is just literally cleaned with warm water or soap if necessary. The body is kept covered the entire time, except when it's being worked on. So if the shoulder is being washed, then the shoulder is uncovered, and then it's covered back up. If the abdomen is being washed, then the abdomen is uncovered, and then it's covered back up. That's step 1, just literally a physical cleaning. Step 2 is a spiritual cleaning. This is usually has a lot of mystical underpinnings, from Jewish mysticism. Bodies washed with a continuous flow of water. That's the second time. That's the only time the body's completely uncovered, but it's probably takes about 35 seconds, and then the body's immediately covered again. Step 3 is the body is dressed. In the next slide, I'll get more into detail about that. And step 4 is the body is put into the casket with a bit of earth from Israel. And I say a bit, I mean a really small bit, like, maybe the amount that would fill up a small snack size Ziploc bag, to sort of begin the burial process. There's a lot more there, but we're limited in time. There is no talking at all during the Tahara. The only speaking that takes place in the room is there are a beautiful, beautiful set of prayers that are said to bring comfort to the deceased, said throughout the process. We actually ask forgiveness of the deceased at the end in case we did anything that wasn't with the utmost sensitivity, if we could have been a drop more gentle. Again, we are cognizant when we're in that room that the soul of the person whose body is in front of us is right there with us and in a very vulnerable state. I shared with you earlier that my background is in medicine, but before I became a nurse practitioner, one of the first jobs that I had was I actually worked in labor and delivery. So I got to be one of those lucky nurses who got to catch the babies as they entered the world. And if you've ever had a baby or had the opportunity to be in the same room when a baby is being born, then you know that when a child is born, they are actually not that clean. So our job as the nurses, after we checked their APGAR scores to make sure that everything, that they were healthy, is we wash the baby, then we diaper and swaddle the baby, and we prepare the baby to return the baby to its mother as quickly as possible. And the first time, now it's probably almost 20 years ago, that I had the opportunity to be in the room where a Tahara was taking place, I was awestruck by two things. The first one was actually how similar it is, how we care for someone at the end of their life, similar to at the beginning. We wash them, we dress them, and we prepare them to return to their maker. And the second thing that struck me was just how quiet the room was. So as a nurse, I also had the opportunity to be in many operating rooms where you have a live person, who's under anesthesia, but they're on the table. But it's certainly very common for doctors and nurses when they're in the operating room to be listening to something on the radio or to be talking about their weekend plans or the score of last night's game, what they're making for Thanksgiving dinner. Nothing like that takes place in the Tahara room. You cannot find a more gentle, sensitive approach to caring for a person who has passed away than to entrust them to a Chaver Kadisha. Let's talk about shrouds, what Jewish shrouds are. When people hear the term shroud, they very often think of like a big white sheet, almost like a toga, like you'd wrap around someone, but that's not at all what traditional Jewish shrouds are. They're a complete set of clothing. They incorporate a pair of pants that are sealed at the bottom, a shirt, an overshirt, a belt, and a head and face covering. They're made of all white. White symbolizes purity. They're made of all natural fibers, something that will be completely biodegradable. Most commonly linen. Linen actually has significance in Jewish mysticism as well. But linen or cotton or muslin. No plastic, no metal, no snaps, no pockets. You probably know why there are no pockets, right? Because no matter how impressive somebody's financial portfolio may be, you don't get to take that with you. Obviously, money is significant and we value money, but it's what you do with the money that you're alive that is important. You don't get to take it with you. A casket. Some people are surprised to learn that according to traditional Jewish law, you don't need any casket at all. And in fact, if you go to Israel, even today, except for those who die in military service, and unfortunately, it's fresh in my mind, people like the hostages that were murdered in captivity by Hamas, they are buried in coffins. The reason the IDF buries in coffins and caskets is because sometimes there's not so much to bury, and it would be very painful to the family. And so as an equalizer, anyone who died in those circumstances is buried in a casket. But other than that, almost everyone in the land of Israel is buried directly in the ground. Again, the goal is we want to return the body to the earth as quickly as possible. So anything that creates a physical barrier can somewhat slow down that process. In the United States, most cemeteries require a casket, and therefore it's not even an option not to use one. But if you need to use a casket from the Jewish perspective, the simpler the casket, the better. And if you're familiar with the term, that's where the plain pine box comes from. Pine is just a very simple wood. It's better if it has no metal parts, no shellac, no liner, and even better if you can drill holes in the bottom, which if sometimes they come like that, or you can request that the funeral home or Chevra Kadisha do. It's important to note that many funeral homes make a lot of money on caskets. People may fall into the feeling like the more I loved my loved one, sort of like I'll get them, or the Rolls Royce of a casket. That does not align with the Jewish perspective. The best thing that you can do for your loved one is to have the least barriers possible to allow their body to decompose and become one with the earth. This is just a general principle I already mentioned in the Tahara room. Respect and modesty. We keep the person's body covered as much as possible. This also speaks to why we don't do viewings. With the viewing, the person's kind of all made up with, their fancy clothes and makeup, and people come and look at the body. It's almost as if that was the sum whole of the person. So really the body's only uncovered when it needs to be, when it's being prepared, or obviously for identification purposes. Burial in the earth. So this is not a custom. This is actually explicit Jewish law. It's an explicit direct mitzvah. If you're familiar with the word mitzvah, a Torah commandment in the Bible, it comes from Deuteronomy, that every single person, it's not just the Jewish perspective that this is the best thing for Jews, but this is for every human being, is that the body needs to be returned to the earth, its source. And I'm saying very specifically in the earth, as opposed to above the earth, like something like a mausoleum. I want to talk about burial versus cremation. This was really the impetus for the creation of Project Last Kindness, which is the sponsoring organization of this, because over the last 20 years, cremation in the Jewish community has become increasingly common. And we feel like a lot of that, there are a lot of factors, which we'll get into, that are driving those decisions. And it's important for me to make a note that the only purpose of the information that I'm now going to share is only to inform future decision making. Whenever I speak and present, I always assume that there's someone listening to me now who cremated somebody close to them that they very genuinely loved. And so I'm going to ask you for forgiveness in advance. I am not sharing information to, God forbid, create guilt or pain. When people make decisions, they make the best decisions they can with the information, the assumptions, and the tools that we have in the moment. So let this information just serve for future decision making. And you should also know that if you have someone you loved who is cremated, souls aren't cremated. It's only the body that is. And so the soul of that person still persists, and you can still do something in their merit, give charity, do a kind act. You can still keep up a relationship with them. We want to share information that we hope will motivate people to plan for burial, and for Jews specifically to plan for Jewish burial and afterlife care. We're just going to take the last, getting to the end of the hour, and very quickly go through a quick comparison. You see here a picture of a Torah scroll. For those of you who are familiar with the Jewish practice, you may know that a Torah scroll, which is a physical object, is probably one of the holiest sacred things. But it's a thing, which means that it also won't last forever. And so when a Torah scroll, which is made out of parchment and ink, can no longer be used, we don't throw it in the recycling can. We don't burn it. That's what the Nazis did to our Torah scrolls. We actually bury them in the earth. A human being is infinitely more sacred than a Torah scroll. And so we bury them. I'll just quickly describe the process of cremation. Many times when people choose cremation, they think loved one passed away and then sprinkling ashes like in some beautiful spot in nature or hanging on an urn. So the process of cremation, and I witnessed it myself. We actually have a 4-minute documentary film showing a cremation process on our website. But here's what it is. The body is put into an oven. The oven is somewhere between 1600 to 2000 degrees. It takes between 2 to 3 hours for everything that can melt to possibly melt and be incinerated. The larger the person, the longer it takes. I've been there. It doesn't smell very good. It's not quiet. What's left at the end of that 2 to 3 hours is very, very charred bone. It's removed. It's put into a second machine that pulverizes it down to the cremation remains. It's such a thorough obliteration of the body that there is no DNA left in those cremation remains. You know, I worked in a hospital. If you pull an IV out of somebody, if you've ever had an IV, you know that that IV doesn't just go into the garbage can. The nurse will walk over to the wall where there's a special, usually a little red trash can attached to the wall and put it in there. You can't just take a body and bury it wherever you want, but you can try this. Go to your post office, tell them you have a bag of cremation remains and you want to mail it to Pennsylvania. And they'll say, sure, here's a box. There's no DNA. There's no organic connection between cremation remains and the person who lived, and they have no legal status, and they also have no status within Jewish law. Jewish burial, in particular, is very much a green process, and their machines are not used. Everything that can be done by hand is done by hand. There's no chemicals, no embalming. The shrouds are biodegradable. If you use a casket, it's biodegradable. Cremation uses machinery. There are a lot of fossil fuels. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, in 2020 put out a report detailing about 30 potential pollutants that get released into the air through the cremation process. I'm going to go a little over time. Land is for the living. This sounds really good. Like we don't have enough land. Land is for the living. It sounds good. It doesn't really add up to the facts. Jerome Kornbluth, who did some research, just a bit dated in 2012, he demonstrated that if every American, I'm not talking about the Jewish community, which makes up about 2% of the American population, but if every American chose cremation, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of American landmass. So most of this country is not developed. There isn't a lot of land in downtown Chicago or New York City, but you don't have to go very far to find available land. Money is a really important factor to talk about. Many people choose cremation simply because it's cheaper. We hope that once people appreciate the value, the importance, the significance of burial, that they will see that this is something worth paying for. Your average person is not indigent. They've bought a house or an apartment, a car, maybe put their kids through college. When we value something, we spend money on it. That being said, by all means, shop around. Doesn't mean you have to use your local funeral home or your local cemetery. You can go out of the city or out of the state. For those who finances truly are an issue, there are resources. And so if you or someone you know within the Jewish community are concerned that they just literally can't afford burial, I want to point out particularly the two organizations listed here on the bottom. Hebrew Free Burial is a nonprofit that's been around for over 100 years. They exist literally to ensure that there's no Jew who's not afforded just the basic right of burial because of finances. Chesed Shel Emes comes out of the Hasidic community, but they will care for any Jew at all. And they bury people every week, absolutely for free. So finances do not need to be a barrier. Let's just do a quick recap. From the Jewish perspective, the soul of every being lives on. The way you live matters. Every moment of life is precious. Every moment of life, you are scripting your eternity experience. Burial is every Jew's right. You don't have to be a good Jew. to be. We don't do it. There's no vetting process. It's just considered a right. And really the perspective is that it's a human right, but we're focused particularly on the Jewish community, but that is the perspective for every human being. Jewish burial is extraordinarily kind. I can tell you as someone who's been in many Tahara rooms, you can't find a kinder, gentler treatment of the body. It's kind to the soul's experience, and it's kind to the planet. I would encourage you to go to lastkindness.org for more resources. We have a printed guide, there are videos. If you do decide to plan for Jewish burial, we encourage you to fill out a form. We work with a legal team to have a legal form for every state in Canada. This form just says what you want and assigns someone who would be notified in the event of your death to carry out your wishes. This is completely separate from a will. This has nothing to do with assets or finances. It doesn't have to go through probate. Really important, though, that this form, if it gets filled out, doesn't just sit on the bottom of a pile of papers, but is given to anyone who needs to be notified. I'll just share with you really a sad story, but it brings out the point, which is that a funeral director in Atlantic City told me that there was a Holocaust survivor, a woman, who had come to him, and she had bought a plot in a cemetery, and she came to him and she arranged for her whole funeral. Like, she prepaid. She took care of everything, except that she didn't tell anyone that she had done that. I don't know the circumstance. I don't know if she had children or nieces and nephews. And this funeral owner and director actually read about her passing in the local paper in the obituary section several weeks after she had died, and she had been cremated. So this is a woman who had survived the gas chambers of Nazi Germany, had bought a plot, had paid for her own funeral, but she didn't tell anyone that who would have been notified. So that's just a really important step. I hope that you found this not just interesting and thought-provoking. I hope it'll inspire you, for each of us, myself included, to try to remember how precious every moment of life is. There's no such thing as a mundane moment. Let's think of Tom. And then I wish everyone a long, healthy life. I hope none of this information is relevant for many decades, but it's better to plan early. It tends to bring people comfort. Also, if you're a decision maker, potentially for somebody else who is older, to share this information with them. If you saw this and you said, you know what, I would love to bring this to my synagogue or to my social group, or if you get enough people together, we could do a Zoom for you. I'm going to stay on for questions, and that survey hits your inbox. It would be, I would really appreciate if you fill it out. And thank you for your time. So I'm going to pause here and start going through the questions. And also, if you want to take yourself off mute, you're more than welcome to. Just going through it. Edie, it's your mom's yard site. Okay. That means it's the yearly anniversary of her passing. We say, may her neshama, her soul, have an elevation. Stacy is a Jewish psychic, and this resonates. I've done many readings and get evidence from loved ones on the other side. What is the Jewish belief on this? The Jewish belief in this is that it definitely makes sense, because we believe souls persist. But the Jewish perspective is we actually don't, traditional Jews don't go to psychics at all. And if you look in the Torah, there's some prohibitions about kind of like disturbing those who have passed away. But it's not that people think it's quackery. I mean, there could be some out there, but the possibility, of course, is that, yes, the souls persist. Why don't we hear from those to us who have died? Deborah asked. I'm not sure what that... Deborah, do you want to take yourself off mute and just flesh out that question? Because I'm not really sure what you mean. Why don't we hear from them? You want to unmute? Deborah, I can't hear you because your microphone is muted. Do you know how to unmute it? I'm going to continue, Deborah. If you could figure it out, then I can go back to that. There's a book called Journey of the Souls, okay, by Michael Newton. I can't comment because I haven't read it. We're all connected, like the toll taker story. That is true. Do Jewish people believe in cremation? You know, I think it's important to say that you can walk into most Jewish funeral homes today and they will offer cremation. But I need to explain that. most Jewish funeral homes today are just businesses. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that they don't care about people, but their bottom line is just to service people and to make money. So since over the last 20 years, more Jews have chose cremation, they offer it. But there's nothing really Jewish about Jewish cremation, except if you look at our history, like Hamas incinerated people, or the Nazis ran probably the most efficient crematoria in Jewish history. So Jews can cremate, they do cremate, but there's nothing that makes that Jewish just because a Jew is doing it. Marilyn said there are many natural burial organizations who promote burying directly into the earth. Yeah, if you wanna, you can look up green burial. Like I said, Jewish burial really is green burial. It's not problematic to bury in a casket. Almost every Jew today is. There's no prohibition about it. It's just, it would be even better if it could be buried directly in the ground. We actually are affiliated with a nonprofit cemetery in South Florida. It's a nonprofit cemetery. So we open because the largest percentage of elderly Jews in this country live in South Florida. A lot of people are very limited in their funds. They're living on Social Security checks, so it's very inexpensive to bury there. And it's actually certified as a green cemetery, and you could be buried there without a casket. South Florida Jewish Cemetery. Does one have to be buried in a Jewish cemetery? It is definitely more ideal if you're a Jew to be buried into a Jewish cemetery, but if the options are being cremated or be buried in a non-sectarian cemetery, there's no question about it. Being buried is the most important thing. Will there be a replay, Sherry? Yeah, if you email me, I can send you a recording. How can we explain to our young grandchildren about the soul? Their mom died 5 years ago. They are now 10 and 13. So Judy, I hope that experience that we did together in the beginning, saying like, let's say you have a young child, saying like, who are you? You know, you're in 5th grade and you're on the soccer team and you're a boy with blonde hair. You know, let's say you weren't on the soccer team anymore. Next year you're going to be in 6th grade, and sort of like trying to go through that process with them. I think actually a lot of children, if you're using language that is age appropriate, can understand this concept. And it certainly is a very, very comforting reality. Why are the Hever Gadisha people anonymous? Fred asked that question. It's a great question, Fred. So in Jewish law, there are categories of levels of kindness. And it is considered the highest level of kindness to care for somebody who can't care for themselves. So when a person has passed away, their body and soul are separated, they are utterly helpless. They are literally in the most utterly helpless position possible. And so when you are part of that Hever Kadisha, and then you're, also if you're involved in the actual burial, that is considered the highest act of kindness. You're helping someone who can't help themselves. And there's also no expectation of reciprocity. Sometimes people help each other, and there's a little bit of another motivation, like, I'm doing them a favor today. I'm lending him my tools today. Next week I might need to borrow his lawnmower, right? Just as like a silly type of example. When you help someone who died, it's just a pure act of kindness. I don't expect he's going to give me anything in the future. And that's why also most Hever Kadishas, people don't want to get paid for this. They just want to do it as a pure act of kindness.
I think I've heard that. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and if you do it with like your name and lights, it's about, like, again, more the honor. We actually are encouraging Hever Kadishas to do more outreach, to create websites, to be found, because most people don't even know that a Hever Kadisha exists because it's so quiet. But that's the root of it. They don't want to take away. Just quiet, behind the scenes. Don't pay me for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is informative. Sure, I'm just going through that. Is there a help or referrals for those who are not Jewish? Thank you, Yael. So in terms of like financial help, is that what you're talking about, Larry? Financial help?
Yeah.
You're on mute, so I just...
Yeah, financial or just your organization for people who aren't Jewish. Everything that you do for the Jewish community. Is there organizations that would do this for the non-Jewish community? Because that financial thing is huge.
Right. So I do not know. I just don't know.
I need to start it.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, it's really important. it's hard because like there is a death industry. And unfortunately, every funeral home pretty much is a business. And like we have a nonprofit cemetery and they may exist out there. I don't know. I mean, it used to certainly be like in New York, like Potter's Field, people who were in homeless shelters, people who just were found in the apartments. Nobody knew anyone, you know what I mean? Someone was found at the subway station, they're brought to the morgue. In some cities today, unfortunately, they do cremate them, but then in certain cities, they will bury them. But that's a little bit more of like an outlying situation, like somebody was just found. I don't know if someone says I just simply can't afford it, but I would say like do your research, shop around. Your local place might be really expensive. You might be able to find something out there. But yeah, you have a mission. Go start it. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll wait another 30 seconds if anyone else has a question. Otherwise, it was so nice to spend this hour together. And I look forward to reading your survey responses and be in touch. Take care, everyone. Have a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you.
You too.